Hello and welcome to Home Run Hiring. I'm your host, Andrea Hoffer. One of the things we've seen with this pandemic is an acceleration in becoming a remote workforce. We're seeing businesses that maybe weren't remote before and then overnight had to adjust to work from home teams. Some businesses chose to set this up as a temporary situation, and others we're seeing are embracing it for the long term. Today, we're going to talk about what this looks like after the pandemic. What do these new remote teams show up as? And this topic came out of a conversation I had with several different business leaders when I was writing a blog in December about how the pandemic has changed hiring challenges. If you're interested in reading the blog, please visit our website at www.aharecruitingexperts.com. The theme that came up over and over again in these conversations was the shift towards hiring remote teams. And one of the business leaders that I spoke with shared insights around this subject that were unique and really interesting. And I think that our audience can really benefit from them. And so I asked her to be a guest on this podcast. And I'm really honored and excited that she agreed to be a guest with us today. So please welcome Sofi Hersher, Managing Director at Ignite Action. And before I introduce her, I just want to read a little bit about her, read her bio about this impressive woman. So Sofi Hersher is the Managing Director of Ignite Action, a boutique digital marketing and strategic communications firm formerly based in Washington, D.C., and now based on the internet. With 10 plus years of experience across both the nonprofit and for-profit sector, Sofi is passionate about building brands and telling stories that demonstrate all the ways we can come together to improve our world. Prior to joining Ignite, Sofi oversaw all social justice communications for the Reformed Jewish movement, the largest denomination of Judaism in North America. In this role at the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, she managed public relations, mass mobilization, marketing, design, and technology infrastructure projects. Before that, she spent 4 years as global brand manager at Twitter in San Francisco. Sofi regularly writes and presents on issues related to religion, social justice, and technology, and is a regular contributor to Pop Sugar News. So Sofi, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. And would you mind just starting off by telling us a little bit about what Ignite Action does and your role there?
Absolutely. So Ignite Action, as you mentioned, is a digital marketing and strategic communications agency. We work with clients across the for and nonprofit sectors, building brands, building out digital marketing strategies, helping them figure out how to tell their story and the story of their users or their donors or their constituents in ways that help mobilize people and move them to action. That's where the name comes from. We're there to sort of ignite action on behalf of our clients and the people that they serve. And my role is changes a little bit every day, but I'm the managing director. So essentially, I report into the CEO, and everybody else reports into me. And I oversee all of the internal operations and client execution for the company. So I oversee a team of designers, of creative strategists, of account managers, and then all of those who work on the internal operations of the business as well. And so my job is to make sure that while our sales pipeline is full, we are staffed and ready to help anyone who engages us.
Interesting. And before the pandemic, how many team members did you have? And how many of those team members were actually remote or in office? And has that changed?
Yeah, so before the pandemic, we had 5 full-time staff members, and they were all based in the DC area. We had an office in Bethesda, and we now have 12 full-time staff members.
Wow.
And 5 of them are still in and around the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, and the rest are distributed throughout the country.
And did you have any concerns about this shift of adding all these remote employees?
I had a tremendous amount of concerns. I mean, I think like many people, I started a job towards the end of 2019, and the rules changed overnight at the beginning of 2020. And I felt confident in my ability to manage an on-site team of 5, and a remote team of 12 is a different conversation altogether. We are also largely a creative services outfit. So part of our work is about talking to other creative people and generating ideas and synthesizing information and figuring out the best way to solve complex problems. And it's a lot harder when you can't be in the same room. It's not impossible, but it's harder. So I had a lot of questions about how to be a creative agency in distributed space. And this year's just been quite a crash course in how to facilitate that type of collaborative culture amongst people who have never met in 3D.
And what are some of the ways that you've started to address that?
It's a great question. So, I mean, again, like many, overnight, everything changed. And so, you know, on Friday, everybody went home and we were a regular in-person office culture. And on Monday, we had a Slack workspace, and the center of our world was entirely online. And what we've tried to do is strategically build out our software ecosystem so that we're not using a million different tools for a million different tasks. And part of that means picking sort of if you think of a software ecosystem as sort of a hub and spoke model, then our hub is Slack. Everything has to come into and out of Slack. And so we've been very thoughtful about which systems we use to solve which problems to make sure that everything can integrate back into sort of our home base. It's not perfect. It hasn't been perfect. And if I had known at the beginning that we were going to be sort of permanently remote, I probably would have done it differently. But that's one of the things that we've done. We've also implemented a bunch of different sort of small workplace policies to try and make sure that people can stay productive, that they can stay that they can stay on the top of their game, right? Because right now we're not just fighting a productivity battle, we're fighting an emotional battle on all fronts as the pandemic continues to disrupt people's lives. So we've implemented policies, for example, every 30-minute meeting is now 25 minutes to make sure that everybody has time between each meeting to prepare in some way for the next one, because we just had people in wall-to-wall meetings all day feeling increasingly compounding stress over the course of the day. Similarly, 60-minute meetings are now 50-minute meetings, things like that. We don't take client meetings on Fridays. Everyone is encouraged to have big blocks of work where they don't allow meetings, 3-4 hour blocks where they're just working. There are a lot of these different policies that we also went to unlimited vacation, unlimited paid time off, which I know, you can argue for or against it, but we've actually mandated that everybody take a minimum of 2 weeks of vacation each year to make sure that people are taking advantage of that policy and that we're avoiding burnout where we can.
Wow. I think that's one of the things a lot of us don't think about when we move to work from home. We almost think, oh, it's going to be easier on people, but really it brings in a whole set of new emotional challenges. What about bonding? Last time we spoke, you said that in the initial time during the pandemic, you saw your team bonding through the chaos. I loved how you put that. Is that still the case? Or have you found other ways to keep that bond strong?
It's a great question. And I think that there are really two types of bonding, I suppose, that are important here, or attachments, I guess. There's attachments to one another, the relationships between colleagues. And then there's the relationship between the employee and the company itself, or the organization itself. And in terms of the relationships between people, I think what I've begun to notice is that you don't have the common denominator of a break room or a place where everyone eats their lunch, or two people who happen to be having a bad day on the same day and they're in the same space. And so you see a little bit of fracturing in terms of people who form the most natural to them sort of groups, right? And then those people are talking throughout the day on Slack and they're getting to know each other, but you're not really cross-pollinating with people who might have different perspectives or different backgrounds, who would likely benefit the most from getting to know their colleagues, who may be different from them. And that's been a challenge because, I'm a leader, but I can't force people to form relationships or to behave in a way that feels completely unnatural to them, especially in a remote environment. So what we have done is we've tried to use our staff meetings as efficiently as possible to make sure that people understand why they're there, that everyone gets a chance to hear their own voice and understand how they're sort of related to what's being discussed. We try and make sure that the people who organize and speak to what's going on in staff meetings changes. So every other week we have an hour-long staff meeting, and it's not just me talking and giving updates, but it's different people presenting on, what does a design process look like, or how do account managers structure their time to be the most efficient, or what does it mean to build a brand story? These are all different tasks that different colleagues take on, and hearing their processes and what's challenging to them builds empathy across our staff, and that's been really important. And I think the other thing that we've taken great pains to do is to try and help people understand how they relate to and bond with the company itself as something larger, right? So I employ mostly millennials, and I will sort of proudly say that I have built a culture that makes sense for who I employ. It's not entirely millennial. We have some people who technically sort of qualify as Gen Z and some people who are Gen X. But what we know about millennials is that they feel a strong need for a sense of belonging and purpose in their work. And, there's actually some really interesting research that's going on across a lot of these work management companies about a sense of belonging. I was actually just reading a study that came out. It was a collaboration between Asana, which is a project management software, and some researchers at UC Berkeley, and it showed that 39% of employees that they had surveyed wanted to know that their work will add value to the business, and 34% wanted to know that their work contributed to the overall vision. Right. And we're a marketing agency, right? We're not a nonprofit. We're not an advocacy organization. So when I thought about what the implications were for that, I realized that we needed a better reason for people to work for us than we generate revenue and pay your salary, right? Like for some that might work, but that wasn't going to work for the millennials that I employ. And that wasn't the type of culture that I wanted to build, because I'm also a millennial. And so what we did is we created what's called a BHAG. I don't love the name, but this is what it's called in the industry. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal. Yeah. I don't know who came up with it. Definitely a man. But we came up with a BHAG that worked for us. And so now our company has as its goal that we are going to mobilize 1 million. We're going to mobilize 10 million people and raise 1 million people towards impact-driven causes and clients over the next 5 years. So now each employee can understand how they contribute to and relate to the larger purpose that our company exists to fulfill. And I think that, and we can actually count, right? Each person can actually say, my client project raised $600,000 for this nonprofit. I get to see that thermometer go up. I understand that I'm working towards something larger and that my colleagues and I are doing this together. So it's a shared sense of purpose, and it bonds sort of horizontally and vertically, I suppose.
I love that. We often even will make these big goals, whether we call them BHAGs or not, but we don't always show how each person in the organization contributes to that. And, I always say that's the most important thing to say, even before you start recruiting to hire for a position, because it doesn't even, it's not just millennials. Everybody wants to know how they contribute to the overall goal, to the overall purpose. We want to be needed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what about onboarding? How have you approached onboarding in this new remote world?
Onboarding. We haven't done it perfectly. As you can tell, we've grown almost 400%, and so that's been a lot of onboarding. And there were a couple of months where I felt like that was all I was doing. And the first thing that we did, as it relates specifically to remote work, is rather than what we used to do, which was you would show up on your first day and I would sort of hand you a laptop and it would say, this is your company issued laptop and let me help you set it up and get everything working. But the reality is now that we are remote, if someone's computer breaks, what are they going to do? They're going to mail it to me and I'm going to go to the Apple store. Like, it doesn't make any sense anymore. And so instead, what we've done is we've created a sort of a hiring IT stipend. I think we call it a remote work stipend. And what we've said is everyone who comes on board as a full-time staff member gets $1,500, up to $1,500 of reimbursable stipend to go out and figure out what they need for their homework environment or their remote work environment. So we chose $1,500 because that could cover the cost of a high-end laptop. Or if you have a laptop that works and you're able to keep it secure, then that can cover a new desk, standing desk, a ring light, a new printer, whatever it is that you think is going to improve your quality of work. So we've had people use it to redo the Wi-Fi in their homes. We've had people use it to buy really high-end headphones. We've had people do it to get standing desks, to do full, new laptops, new complete setup. And we've done this for two reasons. One, because technologically it just makes more sense. We're a small agency. We don't have an IT department, and really no one should be mailing me their technology. And the second is it shows even before the first day that we are valuing and putting trust in our employees. So we're saying to them, we trust you to know best what you need. Just let us know what that is. And then a week before their first day, I sort of set up all of their accounts. So I go through and I invite them, they get an email address and I invite them to everything. And it's all sitting there so that they're aware before their first day. If they want to, there's certainly no expectation that they can set these things up, or on the first day we'll go through and sort of help them understand these are all the systems that you'll need. This is what you'll need to download. This is what you can access from your browser, etc. And then the whole first week is really based around a slow introduction to how the technology ecosystem works, both hardware and software, and who are the owners internally of each system and who to go to for help. And all of that happens alongside, meeting each member of the team and deep dives into the clients that they may be onboarding onto, really getting a sense for the culture, and also just spending some time getting to know their manager and making sure that their manager understands how they communicate, how they see the world, how to motivate them, how to resolve disputes with them, and ultimately what their goals are for the year ahead, so that they can understand how to position their goals alongside the goals the company has set for their role as well.
Wow. So they really get a full 360 of how they not only how to work in your company, but also just how they fit in and how they fit into the culture.
That's the goal. It's really not perfect in execution, but there's a very strong intentionality behind helping people understand that they are a puzzle piece in a larger puzzle, and that this specific, shape of their puzzle piece is important, right? It's not just anyone can fit into this hole. This hole is U-shaped. And let me tell you why, and let me sort of show you how you fit into this, and figuring out sort of how to have real conversations from the very beginning and set up the potential for a honest dialogue moving forward.
Great. And have there been any other challenges that you either anticipated or didn't anticipate by bringing on a remote workforce? And what are some of the steps that you've taken to overcome those challenges?
Yes, definitely challenges. And for us specifically, we had two dovetailing challenges, which is we were a small company scaling rapidly, and we were fighting the pandemic and a transition to remote workplace. So, and I think that happens for a lot of people. You hit plateaus as you build a business, and sometimes you climb that first summit, and suddenly it's a direct climb, and then you're up against something else as well. So for us, my biggest concern over the course of the last year in terms of how to build a scalable model in terms of HR, compensation, culture, etc., had to do with cost of living versus cost of labor, and how to set up fair and transparent compensation. And I'll be the first to say that while there's been a tremendous amount of thought put into this, the way we're doing this is not totally transparent yet across the company, because there are so many implications for building, salary bands and job ladders. And you have to make sure that it's really pressure tested before you just put it out into the world, because you can't control information once you've released it into the world. And you can do your best to control perception, but it's not entirely under your control. So what I mean when I talk about cost of living versus cost of labor is how you build your compensation framework. So is it based on the cost of the sort of basic living requirements in the place that you live? So cost of living is tied to geography. If I live in Washington, D.C., my cost of living is going to be significantly higher than in Jacksonville, Florida. And there's actually a great tool from NerdWallet. It's a cost of living calculator. And you can actually see, for example, if your cost of living in Jacksonville, Florida, if you make a $50,000 salary, would require a $90,000 salary in Washington, D.C. to maintain the same cost of living, right? The same sort of quality of living.
Wow.
That's a huge challenge for remote employers, especially if, unlike in tech, you don't have a baseline that's set by sort of one geographic area that is sort of the center or the hub of everything, right? So in technology, a lot of tech companies are really at the front of this cost of living versus cost of labor conversation. And most of the time, the cost of labor, which is not tied to geography, but is tied to a sort of the generally accepted baseline cost of employing that role or that skill set. If you have something like the technology industry, your baseline is still going to be San Francisco or Silicon Valley, not necessarily because it's a geographic area, but because that's where there's a standard set by the companies that have conglomerated there, rather than the people who live there or the cost that it costs them to rent an apartment or buy groceries. And so we don't have a baseline. We're a marketing company. We're an agency, but we're not the big flashy New York City agencies. We're not competing with agencies in Berlin and Paris. We're a smaller shop by design. We have niche clients. And so our compensation structure is built to be fair, right? But what is fair, right? It's built to give people a meaningful living, but a meaningful living means something different in Louisville, Kentucky than it does in Sacramento, California, or it does in Washington, D.C. And I have staff in all three of those places. And so when I looked at that and I sort of said, I'm going to tear all my hair out and stay up all night screaming because I have no idea what to do. Because also we're a small company. I am HR, right? Like I'm the managing director. I manage almost everyone. And my job is to make sure that people feel like this is a company they want to work for. And so the first thing that I started really digging into was building out job ladders and salary bands. So in order to be transparent, there has to be a system. You can't transparently be totally arbitrary, because that's not going to build any trust between you and your employees. So what I did is I went out into the world and I found examples of strong job ladders and salary bands. And I have to say, I left a previous job because they didn't have these things, because I knew other people in my sort of roughly same level were making wildly different amounts of money. And whether it was because I was a woman or because I had less years of experience, I don't know. I filled in the gaps myself because there was no transparency. And the more I filled in, the more frustrated I got, right? So now what we have is a job ladder, which basically says, completely separate from who we actually have on staff. This is completely agnostic to the people we have on staff. These are the roles we have within the company. And according to our baseline, which we have set for ourselves, which we have loosely tied to a Washington, D.C. cost of living, loosely, because that's where the founder and myself, so our entire executive team, lives. We have created salary bands per each of those rungs on the ladder so that anyone, regardless of their experience or their background, is put into a band, right? Once they're in a band based on the role that we have created, then their experience, their background, their specific set of skills, all of that is what determines where they fall within the band. And it's allowed us to be so much more intentional when someone asks for a raise, or we have a really promising new hire, or someone even comes to us and says, hey, why is this my salary? I can answer that question now. And it's not just, well, because we started out in DC, and so this is how much people were making, but you live somewhere else, so you make less because that's the competitive rate for your city. All of that just feels really challenging when what you're trying to do with new employees and remote employees in general is really build a sense of trust and expectation so that they can expect as much from you as you are asking them to live up to the company's expectations. So cost of living versus cost of labor has been a real challenge for us. And we've kind of taken a mid-range approach. We've sort of tried to make sure that everyone is paid appropriately for their geographic area, but that also fits into what is an acceptable cost of labor for their role. Because at the end of the day, we're a company. Our job is to continue to exist and continue to employ people. But you have to employ people at a living wage. You have to respect them for their talents. And in order for them to flourish and grow, you have to help them understand how appreciated they are for their individual choices and background. So that's the first one. The second one I'll say is about the productivity gap. So and I mentioned a little bit about technology and software. And one of the first sort of roadblocks I've hit over and over again as I think about how to make the company more efficient is this question of, do I use blunt tools that are part of a singular system to solve problems? Or do I find the sharpest possible tools that are all completely discrete to tackle individual problems? And it's not clear, right? Which one you use. I mean, you can use, for example, if you wanted a CRM that also sent email, that also did your audience segmentation, that also created flowcharts, that also, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can design in it, this, that, and the other. What you're going to get is a simple system that people can go to for almost everything, but it's not going to be able to do all the various things that you might want it to do if you could find the one specific tool or the one specific key to that particular problem's lock. And what we have now, which now we're starting to really sort through intentionally, is, passwords to like 25, 30 different softwares, right? And each one of them does something super specific, and it's so great at what it does. But at some point, the usefulness and the effectiveness really starts to plateau because people are shifting mentally 25, 30 times a day between different tools. And there's a loss of productivity and a loss of focus every single time you ask someone to shift between the logic of one system to the logic of another. And that's a really, really big challenge in terms of remote work, because when I ask my team, what do you wish we had? Right? I ask them this a lot. If there was one document or one process that existed that doesn't now, what would it be? I hear things as simple as, could we create a Dropbox map? We have so many different things stored in Dropbox. That's where all of our files are. But our work management system is in Asana, but we communicate in Slack and we track our hours in Harvest. And there is no one tool that does all of those things, but they're sort of like, I have to spend many minutes a day trying to think through where something is and how to communicate on that platform. And someone sent me a document to review. Do I send my feedback in Slack, or do I put it in a Google Doc, which lives in Dropbox, and then I email it, and you start to, it's maddening. It's actually maddening. And there are real implications for this that are not just employee frustration. I mean, if you think about it from the business side, it's like 27% of workers that say that, they're missing messages, they're missing conversations because they're switching between apps, and that app overload, right? It sort of makes everyone less efficient. And it's hard to prioritize because you don't know where to be at any given time. So that's the second thing that I think I didn't quite expect, because my first thought was, let me give everyone the best tools I can find to solve their problems. And that actually created a secondary problem, which is a really disorganized toolbox, essentially.
I'm just laughing inside as you're sharing this, because this is our biggest problem at AHA right now. And because we intentionally researched and looked for the best technology out there. There's always something new coming out that's related to recruiting and onboarding. And so we make sure we always have the best tools in our toolbox. But sometimes I don't even know how many programs we're using at any given moment. And it's so easy to let something fall through the cracks. And even budget wise, my CFO is always like, we need to get the spending down. And the place we have to start is the software. That's what we're outrageously.
Yeah.
So if you have an answer, I'm like waiting with bated breath, but I don't know if you do or not at this point.
Well, I mean, I have a couple of methods for how to tackle it. I mean, the answer is going to be different for each person, but one of the things that we have started to do, and we've just moved into the space where we are, we have sort of an operations team, or we have people who can think about these things. They're not just focused on client work, right? That's been a big shift for our company, is having the time and space to look internally. And one of the things that we've done is we've implemented sort of an annual review where we gather all of our expenses and we isolate those that are software, and we figured out, interestingly enough, we had two different softwares that were both specifically about sort of creating visual flow charts, visual charts of different kinds. Well, we don't need to spend $8.99 and $15.99 a month for that, right? Similarly, we often use Canva to create social media graphics or things like that. And we had been using a package where we had each employee sort of listed separately, even though most of those employees weren't using Canva. They just, when we added it to our system, we said, well, everyone should have access to it, not realizing that not everybody's work actually touches Canva. So once we actually looked at that, we said, oh, we can decrease this by a couple $100 a month because not everybody's using it, even though we have everybody registered. That's another way. We're just the process of review is really important. Yeah. We also have something called a systems map, which is basically a visual representation of all of our softwares and how they fit together. So, and anything that is a single use software, we sort of start to ask, is there a better way to tackle this, right? So if you have something like Slack, and you know that that's sort of the center of your communication strategy, then you can start to say, okay, I see all these other single-use tools. Are there any of these that don't integrate with Slack? Okay, let's see if there's a better way to do that so that we can decrease the amount of switching that we need to do. Can we do this all through Slack? So that it may be a single-use tool, but if we can use it through Slack, it won't feel quite so distinct out in space. And if it can't be integrated with Slack, maybe there's a different program that does the same thing that's really going to help us be more efficient in the way that we work. So that's one way to do it. The other, it has a lot to do with just internal resources. So having some sort of an internal wiki or document where you write out, this is how we expect you to use these systems. Because if management can't articulate how the systems fit together, then they are not serving the needs of their employees the best that they can, because they're leaving them to do the intellectual labor of putting all these pieces together without holding themselves accountable to the intellectual labor of why those pieces are there in the first place. So writing all of that down and making that accessible is something that we've found really helpful.
Wow, I'm learning so much from you. This is very good information. And there's some of these things you just don't really think about on a day to day, and you need to spend time focusing on it so that your day to day is more productive. I love it. So tell me, and this is a little bit off topic, but I'm curious, during the pandemic, when the pandemic first hit, a lot of small businesses, a lot of businesses in general, ended up closing down or shrinking, or really having, a lot of problems as far as keeping their doors open. And yet your company grew tremendously. What do you attribute that to?
Equal parts luck, and being well positioned in a market, and being a digital first organization. So we were lucky enough that our business was helping nonprofits figure out how to utilize digital space in the best possible way. And some of the people that we've been talking to for years, in some cases, about how to help or the improvements that we thought they could make to their systems, and they'd always said, it's not a priority. It's not a priority. It's not a priority. Well, this year became a big priority, right? And we'd kind of been out there all along saying, here are some things you need to learn how to do. And so that I think was pretty helpful. The second thing is that while while the entire world kind of exploded, some of our largest costs went down, which actually allowed us to make some big bets. So we no longer paid rent, which was our, other than payroll, was our largest expense monthly, and we were able to ask ourselves, okay, well, what would we do with this money if it was just a fun windfall, and we were able to reinvest that into increasing our number of staff, and increasing our number of staff increased our capacity to take on new projects and bigger projects, and it sort of spiraled from there. And I think also our industry, we work primarily, though not solely, with nonprofits. We sort of see ourselves as working with impact-driven organizations. So for example, while most of our clients are nonprofits, we do work with sustainable meat distributors and things like that, where we can understand the impact that they're trying to make, which is systemic and long-term to society and to the world. But because we have worked with so many nonprofits that exist in sort of the legacy space, they are already up against a number of challenges. One of which is that their system is not built for digital transformation, right? They've probably spent years avoiding a digital transformation. And they really need thought partners, not just boots on the ground. They need thought partners to figure out what questions that they should be asking over the next couple of years. And we've been positioned to do that. And in addition to that, these are organizations often that rely on donor funding. And we're up against the largest wealth transfer in human history in the next 10 or 15 years. And younger generations require being communicated with online and in digital spaces. And because we were there all along, we were able to take advantage of this opportunity to say to people, we're here, we're ready to help you. We can talk to you on Zoom. Zoom wasn't new for us. We were already using it, right? So I think we were well positioned to take advantage of what could have been catastrophic for our business, and I know was for so many others. And there's some guilt, that I carry with that. But I've tried to channel that guilt into employing as many people as I can from all over the country, so that their talents are being utilized, and they've landed in a place that that they're respected for the full range of contributions that they can make.
Wow, very impressive. So what is the most important piece of advice that you would give an employer who has just recently found themselves and now are having a remote team when before they had an in-office team?
So the most important piece of advice I would give is to find a network of people in similar situations. I think I've been very lucky in that or I guess another word for that is I've been quite diligent in building a network of people who also run early stage or small companies and agencies that I can turn to for help and say, have you encountered this issue? How have you handled it? And that sharing of ideas has saved me hundreds of hours of research and agonizing over the right way to go, because I have trusted sources that have already learned some of this, and I've been able to share my own learnings with. So the first thing is really don't think you have to do it alone. And the other piece, I think, and this is going to sound very millennial, but it's also to be transparent with your staff about the challenge of building a remote company so quickly, and listening and asking questions and being able to acknowledge when something isn't perfect, rather than defensively saying, well, this is better than it is somewhere else, right? Being able to say, look, we're building and I appreciate your input and I'm going to take that into consideration, and I probably can't fix it tomorrow, but I'm really doing my best to build a sustainable solution for a year from now. And I think that also builds trust, which is overall sort of the entire exercise here. That's sort of probably the marquee takeaway from our conversation. From my perspective, is everything you do as a business leader should be in service of building trust with your employees and whomever it is you're serving out in the world. And you can't do that without a little bit of humility. And that's something I've learned. I mean, I came into this, I worked at Twitter in the early days. I sort of said, well, I know consumer technology. This is going to be fine for me. I used to work from home sometimes, and it's not a breeze for anyone. And also, I think the last thing would be to focus really, really heavily into helping your team prioritize and figure out what problem are you solving right then? What is the problem you're going to solve next? Try not to solve them all at one time, but to actually sort of really look at your team, ask them what they need, and then create an order of operations so that you can systematically improve the efficiency and productivity in your company. Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself crazy looking for the one perfect solution that it doesn't exist. It's not out there.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sophie. You've brought so much value today, and in so many different areas that I think our listeners are going to gain a lot from hearing you and watching you. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you or use your services, what's the best way to contact you?
You can email me, certainly. You can go to our website and use the contact function. So our website is igniteaction.co, so not .com, but .co, igniteaction.co. And my first name is spelled a bit unusually. It's spelled Sofi, no E's anywhere. And my email address is sophie@igniteaction.co. And I would love to talk to anyone else struggling with these same issues and trying to build a sustainable and an ethical and an empathetic company that can thrive far beyond the pandemic. Because I think, we're all experiencing a state of emergency right now, but God willing, the vaccine rollout continues to go smoothly, and that eventually we can return to some form of new normal. And at that point, I think some of the grace will go away, and we're going to need to tackle these problems in earnest.
Right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to all of you for joining us and tuning in. This is Home Run Hiring, and I am Andrea Hoffer. Please stay safe and happy and have a great day.